Just 3 months ago, my parents, Walter and Helen Evans, used crowbars to force their way into a home they believed was mine. I wasn't present to witness it, but the police report laid out the scene in stark detail. They swung those metal bars, the same tools my dad had once used to build a treehouse for me in our old backyard, to obliterate windows and punch holes through drywall. They destroyed a stranger's wedding portraits and reduced a young family's living room to a ruin of shattered glass and splintered furniture. When the officer called me, my initial thought was that they had finally done it, that they had managed to demolish the last untouched corner of my life. But I was mistaken. As I watched them on the courthouse steps, two figures I barely recognized anymore, it dawned on me that they hadn't destroyed a single thing that belonged to me. In their rage, they had unwittingly given me the one gift I never knew I was desperate for: my freedom. My name is Clara Evans, and this is how I discovered that the most dangerous monsters aren't hiding under your bed. Sometimes they're sitting across from you at the dinner table, smiling. Before we get into the whole story, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Long before the splintered wood and the cold, sterile environment of a courtroom, my universe was defined by the quiet hum of a computer server and the pale glow of its monitor. For 6 years, my entire world was a cramped studio apartment in Denver. It featured a single window with a scenic view of a brick wall, a futon that served as both bed and sofa, and a kitchenette where a gourmet meal consisted of canned tomato soup with a side of saltines. I was 29, but I carried the weariness of someone much older. My life was a monotonous cycle of writing code and brewing coffee, a lonely and deliberate path I had chosen for one singular objective. That objective was a number: $150,000. It was the down payment for my first house. It was the price tag on my liberation. I was a software analyst, and I always volunteered for the graveyard shifts that nobody else wanted because they offered a slight pay bump. From 7 p.m. to 4 a.m., I would sit in a frigid, fluorescent-lit office, hunting for glitches in the code of elegant programs others had designed. The job was isolating, but it was honest. A computer never lies. It doesn't have hidden agendas or passive-aggressive tendencies. There's a problem, and you either solve it or you don't. I found comfort in that straightforwardness. When my shift was over, I didn't head home to bed. I'd go to a 24-hour cafe, order the cheapest black coffee on the menu, and flip open my personal laptop. I took on freelance jobs, building basic websites for local businesses, or debugging code for developers in other time zones. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford, usually just 4 or 5 hours in the late afternoon before my alarm would shriek, signaling the start of another cycle. My friends from college had gradually stopped reaching out. They were busy getting married, having children, and taking vacations to tropical islands. They'd post albums filled with smiling, sun-drenched faces while I was hunched over a screen, trying to fix a critical bug for an extra $100. I couldn't hold it against them for letting our friendships fade. I had become a bore. My only topic of conversation was work. My only plan for the weekend was more work. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, watching other people's happiness from a distance. And it was all for the house. The house was so much more than just a structure of wood and nails. It was a promise I had made to myself. It was the vision of a quiet morning with sunlight pouring through a clean window. It was the idea of a small garden where I could grow my own herbs. It was a front door with a lock that only I had the key to. A place where I could feel completely safe, where nobody could ask me for anything. Every dollar I managed to save was a brick in its foundation. Every night of lost sleep was a shingle on its roof. I had a clear picture of it in my head, a small Victorian cottage with a wraparound porch and a sprawling maple tree in the front yard, a place that felt solid and self-sufficient, that wouldn't yield to anyone else's will, a place that was unequivocally mine. My family was incapable of understanding this dream. To them, it was a bizarre and selfish fixation. My parents, Walter and Helen Evans, were what you might call middle-class fantasists. They lived in a perfectly nice suburban home, but acted as if they were royalty temporarily inconvenienced by their circumstances, always waiting for some grand stroke of luck to restore them to their rightful place. They believed in big gambles and shortcuts. The slow, methodical grind of hard work was for other people. Life was supposed to deliver a windfall, and their personal windfall, their miracle, was my older sister. Olivia was gorgeous, charming, and possessed a natural confidence that made people want to give her the world. Growing up, everything seemed to bend to her will. If she wanted a new dress for a school dance, my mother would be at her sewing machine all night. When she decided she wanted to be an artist, my father cashed out a retirement bond to buy her a top-of-the-line easel and paints. Her whims were treated as sacred pursuits. Her passing fancies were celebrated as life-defining goals. She never had to truly work for anything. Things just seemed to fall into her lap, and everyone, especially our parents, was thrilled to facilitate it. Her husband, Leo, was a perfect match. He was a smooth talker with a dazzling smile and an endless portfolio of genius business ideas that were always just about to make them millionaires. There was the artisanal pickle company that never sold a single jar, the mobile app for rating public restrooms that no one ever downloaded, and the short-lived life coaching business where he was the only client. Each spectacular failure was never his fault. It was always a volatile market, a treacherous business partner, or a brilliant concept that was simply too far ahead of its time. My parents adored him. They saw his string of failures as evidence of his bold, entrepreneurial spirit. He was a risk-taker, unlike me, their quiet, predictable, and disappointingly practical younger daughter. Despite the widening chasm between their universe and mine, I still attended family dinner every Saturday. I'd make the 45-minute drive from my cramped studio to their tidy suburban house, a familiar knot of obligation tightening in my gut with every mile. I told myself it was my duty as a good daughter. I told myself that family was supposed to be a safe harbor. But looking back, I think I just clung to the hope that if I kept showing up, one day they might finally see the real me. The dinners were always painfully predictable. Mom would cook a roast chicken. Dad would complain about the neighbor's new lawnmower with a mix of envy and disdain. And Olivia and Leo would monopolize the conversation with their latest grandiose schemes. I would sit there sipping a glass of iced tea and just listen. I'd listen to them talk about the ski trip they were planning, the fancy new restaurant they tried, the loan they were thinking about for Leo's next can't-miss venture. No one ever really asked about my job. They didn't grasp what I did and showed no curiosity in finding out. They never asked how I was faring in my tiny apartment, or why I always looked so exhausted. I was just Clara, the quiet wallpaper in the background of the main event, the reliable, stable, invisible one. I had confided in my mother once, about a year into my savings plan. I was worn down and feeling desperate, and I needed someone to tell me I was doing the right thing. I told her about the house, about the $150,000 goal. I even showed her a printed-out listing for a little yellow Victorian that was for sale. "It's for my future, Mom," I'd said, "a place that's all mine." She had smiled faintly and patted my hand. "That's lovely, dear," she'd said, her eyes already glazing over. "Just be careful with your money. You never know when your family might need it." At the time, I brushed it off as a strange throwaway comment. I didn't recognize it for what it was, a warning. I hadn't yet understood that in my family's worldview, my hard-earned savings were never truly my own. They were a communal fund, a safety net they all assumed was there for them to use. I was just the person responsible for weaving it, and they were just waiting for the right time to test its strength. That October night, the air in my parents' house felt different. It was heavy, thick with unspoken purpose. Normally, Saturday dinners were a cacophony of noise, with the TV blaring sports in the background and my mother bustling between the kitchen and the dining room. But tonight, it was eerily quiet. The television was off. The table was set with the formal dinnerware, the plates with the delicate floral pattern that were reserved for special occasions. It felt like a stage set. My father, Walter, was unusually silent, staring into his plate of food as if it held profound secrets. My mother, Helen, was the opposite, her smile too wide, her cheerfulness too forced. It was the kind of brittle pleasantry that often precedes a hurricane. "Clara, honey, you look exhausted," she said, piling an extra scoop of mashed potatoes onto my plate. "You're working far too hard." It was her usual refrain, but tonight it didn't sound like concern. It felt like an accusation. Olivia and Leo arrived late, sweeping in with a strange, jittery energy. Olivia wasn't in her typical casual attire. She was wearing a business-like pantsuit and clutching a portfolio. Leo trailed her, carrying a tripod and a large presentation easel. I looked at them, then at my parents. A cold knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an ambush. "Sorry we're late," Olivia announced, her voice pitched a little too high. "We were just putting the finishing touches on something. Big things are on the horizon." Leo set up the easel near the fireplace, while Olivia arranged glossy brochures and charts on the coffee table. They looked like contestants preparing to pitch a product on a reality show. My dad finally looked up from his plate, but his eyes avoided mine. He cleared his throat and took a long sip of water. He knew what was coming. They all did. We ate in near silence, the tension broken only by my mother's strained small talk about the weather and my sister's vague, excited proclamations about the future. After the plates were cleared, Olivia stood up, her face beaming. "Okay, everyone, time for the big reveal." I remained at the dining table, watching as my parents and Leo gathered around the coffee table like eager venture capitalists. Olivia began her presentation. The new business was called Zenith Wellness, a subscription box for ethically sourced, spiritually aligned crystals and aromatherapy oils. She spoke about synergy, holistic ecosystems, and capturing the high vibrational market. She used a string of buzzwords she had clearly picked up from Leo, who stood beside her nodding vigorously, chiming in with phrases like paradigm shift and unprecedented scalability. It was the same as all his other schemes, a flimsy concept built on fleeting trends and pure fantasy, with no realistic business model to support it. I listened quietly, my heart sinking with each word. I wasn't sinking for her. I was sinking for me, because I knew with a dreadful certainty that this somehow involved me. Finally, she flipped to the last board on her easel. It was a financial forecast, a ludicrous graph showing a line soaring vertically into imaginary profits. "And all it will take to launch Zenith Wellness and secure our first-year inventory," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured drama, "is a one-time seed investment." She paused, turning from the board to look directly at me for the first time all evening. Her eyes were bright and expectant. I just need $150,000, she said, the number landing in the quiet room like a grenade. And Mom said you have it saved up. Silence. A profound, suffocating silence that absorbed all the air in the room. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded deafening. I looked from Olivia's confident, smiling face to my mother's anxious, pleading one. Then I looked at my father, who was now intently studying a spider web in the corner of the ceiling. They had planned this. My mother had taken the one deeply personal, vulnerable secret I had shared with her and had served it up to my sister on a platter. My savings, my 6 years of sleepless nights, of canned soup and social isolation, of coding until my vision blurred. To them, it wasn't my dream. It wasn't my future. It was a convenient solution to Olivia's latest whim. It was just a pile of money, and they had already decided how it was to be spent. In that instant, I wasn't their daughter. I was a line of credit. I was a bailout. The invisible girl had suddenly become very visible, but only because she was the gatekeeper to a treasure chest. The bone-deep exhaustion I had carried for years morphed into something else, a cold, hard anger that solidified in my chest. I kept my voice low and steady. "No," I said. The word was tiny, but it felt monumental. Olivia's smile wavered. "No? What do you mean, no?" "Clara, this is a sure thing." "My answer is no," I repeated, turning my gaze to my mother. "That money is for my house." My mother flinched. "Now, Clara, let's not be rash," she began, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. "Olivia has poured her heart into this. This is her dream." "I've worked hard too," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "For my dream. You know that. I told you." Leo stepped forward then. "Look, Clara, we'd make you an equity partner. We'd pay you back with interest as soon as the business is profitable." "There is no business," I said flatly. "There's just another one of your ideas. And I am not paying for it." That's when Olivia's eyes welled up with tears. It was her signature move, the one that never failed. As soon as the tears began, my parents would rush to her side, ready to slay whatever monster had wounded their precious girl. Tonight, that monster was me. "I don't understand why you're being so hateful," she sobbed, sinking dramatically onto the sofa. "You're my sister. I thought you would be happy for me. I thought you'd want to help." "Helping you isn't my job," I said, and the words felt both terrifying and liberating. The atmosphere in the room turned glacial. My mother's face hardened, the fake smile vanishing, replaced by a look of sheer contempt. "You have always been jealous of her," she hissed. The accusation was so baseless, so profoundly unjust, that it stole my breath. I wasn't jealous. I was tired. I was tired of being the solid ground they all stood on while they reached for the clouds. I stood up to leave. I couldn't breathe in that house a moment longer, but my father moved to block my path to the door. He finally looked at me, his eyes cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. They were the eyes of a stranger. "Your sister needs help," he said, his voice a low growl, "and you have the means to provide it. You will give her that money, or you are no longer welcome in this family." My father's words hung in the air, heavier than any silence that had ever filled that room. "You will give her that money, or you are no longer welcome in this family." It wasn't a threat uttered in a moment of passion. It was a business proposition, a final transaction. My worth as a daughter had just been assessed, and the price was $150,000. My place at their table had a price, and my sister's ridiculous business idea was the invoice. I looked past him to my mother. Her face was a mask of cold fury, and she gave a slight nod, confirming her agreement with my father. Her arms were crossed tightly, as if she were either comforting herself or shielding herself from me. Then my eyes found Olivia. The crocodile tears had already dried. Her expression was one of sullen, defiant entitlement. She genuinely saw herself as the victim, and my refusal as a personal attack born of spite. Leo stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder, his face a smug mask of disappointment. He was the noble prince, and I was the wicked stepsister, refusing to fund their fairy tale. In that instant, something inside me shattered. It wasn't my heart. It was the chain of obligation I had been dragging around my entire life. The faint hope that one day they would see me, that they would value me for who I was and not for what I could give them, simply dissolved. It vanished into the cold, stale air of that living room. They didn't see a daughter or a sister. They saw a resource that was refusing to be exploited. "Fine," I said. The word was a whisper, but it was the loudest thing in the room. My father's expression faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He had expected me to plead, to cry, to bargain. He had spent 29 years constructing this cage of familial duty around me, and he couldn't process the fact that I had just walked out of it. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice low. I said, "Fine," I repeated, grabbing my purse from the chair. I walked towards him. For a split second, I thought he might physically stop me, that this ultimatum would turn into a hostage situation. But I didn't falter. I looked him directly in the eye, and he took an involuntary step back, clearing my path to the front door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back at my mother or my sister. Their faces were already fading in my mind, becoming portraits of people I once knew. I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp October night, and pulled it shut behind me. The solid click of the latch was the final word in a lifelong argument. I have no memory of the drive back to my apartment. I must have obeyed traffic laws, stopped at red lights, but my mind was a protective blank. My brain had shut down to shield me from the enormity of what had just happened. I had been disowned. I had been cast out because I wouldn't hand over my entire life savings. I parked my car, climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my studio, and sat on my futon in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I just felt empty. A hollowed-out space where a family used to be. The next morning, I woke up as the sun hit the brick wall outside my window. The first clear thought that entered my mind was, I don't have to go to dinner on Saturday. A small, strange wave of relief washed over me. No more 45-minute drives, filled with anxiety. No more sitting in silence while their dramas played out. No more feigning interest in Leo's latest fantasy. The emptiness was still there, but it was being filled with something new, quiet. My first real act of freedom was to call my phone company. I reported my phone as lost and requested a new number. It was a lie, but it was simpler than explaining the truth. Within an hour, the invisible leash that had connected me to them was severed. They couldn't reach me anymore, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The following year was simultaneously the hardest and most wonderful of my life. The loneliness was sharp at first. Holidays were the worst. On Thanksgiving, I ate a microwavable turkey dinner alone in my sterile office, watching old movies on my laptop. On Christmas, I picked up an extra shift just so I would have a place to be. There were moments my hand would hover over the keyboard, tempted to search for them on social media, to see if they were happy, to see if they missed me. But I never did. I knew that looking back would only bring pain, so I forced myself to look forward. I channeled all of that orphaned energy into my work. I took on more freelance projects, worked more overtime. The balance in my savings account climbed steadily. $125,000, $140,000. Then, one Tuesday in August, a final payment for a big freelance project cleared, $150,218. I stared at the number on my banking app for a full 10 minutes. I had done it on my own. The silence from my family was absolute. I didn't know if they had even tried to contact me. Maybe they sent letters to my old address. Maybe they left angry voicemails on my old number. Or maybe, and this was the thought that both stung and healed, they had simply forgotten I existed. Once I was no longer of use, I was no longer real. With the money secured, I began my house hunt. I spent weekends with a realtor, a kind, patient woman named Maria who actually listened to me. I wanted something small but solid, something with history, something with good morning light. We saw a dozen houses, but none of them felt right. Then one day she called, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I found it, Clara. I think this is the one." It was a small Victorian cottage on a quiet, tree-lined street in a leafy neighborhood. It was painted a soft, buttery yellow with white trim and had a wide front porch with a swing. A massive maple tree stood like a guardian in the front yard. The moment I walked inside, I knew. The floors were original hardwood, warm and marked with the passage of time. The living room had a brick fireplace, and the kitchen had a large window over the sink that looked out onto a small, sun-drenched backyard. The light, a soft golden morning light, filled every room. It felt safe. It felt honest. It felt like home. 2 months later, I sat on the floor of my empty living room, a set of keys clutched in my hand. It was mine. Every floorboard, every window, every blade of grass in the backyard was mine. I had built this life for myself, not with a family loan or a spousal handout, but with my own 2 hands, one line of code at a time. The silence that had once felt like a punishment now felt like a reward. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of a life that was finally, completely mine. 5 years went by, 5 quiet, steady, peaceful years. The silence from my family became a normal part of my world, a background hum I no longer registered. I flourished in that silence. I painted the interior walls of my house a warm, inviting cream. I planted a garden in the backyard, wrestling with stubborn weeds and replacing them with tomato vines and lavender. I earned a promotion at work, and then another. I was now leading a small team of analysts, working primarily from home in a sunny office I had created in the 2nd bedroom. The exhausting all-nighters and freelance grind were a distant memory. I made friends. I hosted small dinner parties on my back patio. I even started dating someone, a kind and stable man named Daniel, who was an architect and appreciated the sturdy, honest bones of my little Victorian cottage as much as I did. I was 34 years old, and for the first time in my memory, I was truly, deeply happy. I thought that chapter of my life was closed for good. I believed that when I had walked out their front door 6 years ago, it was the final scene. I was wrong. It was only the intermission. The email arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. It landed in my inbox with an innocuous little ping that gave no hint of the chaos it was about to unleash. The sender was Helen Evans, my mother. I hadn't seen her name anywhere in over half a decade. My first instinct was to delete it, unread, a self-preservation reflex I had honed to protect my peace. But my curiosity, that treacherous, lingering piece of my old self, won out. The subject line was just 2 words: your sister. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. The email was brief, every word steeped in manipulative urgency. "Clara, I know we haven't spoken, There isn't a day I don't regret that. I am writing to you now because I have nowhere else to turn. It is a matter of life and death. Olivia is in serious trouble and she needs her family. She needs you. Please, I am begging you. Meet me. Mom. I read it 3 times. Life and death. The words were so melodramatic, so cliché. It sounded like a line from a terrible soap opera. My logical mind, the part of me that analyzed code for a living, screamed that it was a trap. Nothing had changed. This was just a new, more desperate version of the old tactic. But then there was the other part of me, the small, buried part that still remembered being a little girl who believed her mother was her protector. What if it was real? What if Olivia was truly in danger? What if my refusal to respond was tantamount to a death sentence? Could I live with that? The guilt, I realized, was a hook they had planted in me long ago, and it still knew how to catch. Against my better judgment, against every screaming instinct in my body, I typed a reply, where and when. She wrote back instantly, "The Summit Diner, tomorrow at noon. Thank you, Clara. Thank you." The Summit Diner was a drab, greasy spoon located halfway between my city and their suburb. Neutral ground. Daniel asked if I was sure I wanted to go. He knew the whole story, and his face was etched with concern. "You don't owe them anything, Clara," he said gently, taking my hand. "I know," I said, my voice a whisper. "I just have to be sure." The next day, I walked into the diner and saw them huddled in a booth at the back. My father, my mother, Olivia, and Leo, the whole clan, assembled for another intervention. They all looked older. My father's hair was more gray than brown. My mother had new, deep lines around her mouth. And Olivia, she looked frayed. The effortless radiance she'd always carried was gone, replaced by a dull, anxious pallor. Leo was the only one who seemed unchanged, dressed in a suit that was a size too tight, a practiced, reassuring smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. I slid into the booth across from them. The air was thick with 6 years of resentment and unsaid words. My mother reached across the table to take my hand, but I pulled it back and folded my arms on the table. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice level. The email said life and death. It was Leo who spoke, assuming the role of family representative. He leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Clara, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this table." A few years ago, Olivia's business, Zenith Wellness, actually took off. It was a huge success. To scale up, we took on some private investors. I could already tell this was a carefully constructed fabrication. Olivia's business had not been a success. I knew because, in a moment of weakness a couple of years ago, I had Googled it. The company had folded in less than 2 years. "These weren't your usual investors," Leo continued, his voice dropping even lower. "These are serious people, loan sharks, people who don't follow the rules." The market shifted. There was a supply chain disruption. Long story short, the business collapsed. We owe them $200,000, and they want it by the end of the month. Olivia let out a theatrical sob, burying her face in her hands. "They're going to hurt us, Clara. They know where we live." I looked from Olivia's shaking shoulders to Leo's grim face. It was all so performative, yet my mother seemed to genuinely believe it. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Clara," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're the only one who can help us." I just stared at her, my mind a cold, clear space. I waited for the real request. I knew it was coming. They hadn't invited me here for my advice or my emotional support. They had a very specific solution in mind. My mother took a shaky breath, her eyes flicking down to my hands, then back to my face. "Your house," she said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. The market has been incredible. It must be worth a fortune by now. It's just a thing, Clara. It's bricks and wood. If you sell your house, you could get the money. You could save your sister. There it was. The same demand, just with a higher price and a more dramatic plot. After 6 years of complete silence, they had materialized not to apologize, not to reconnect, not to even ask how I was, but to ask me to liquidate my entire existence. To burn down the sanctuary I had so carefully built for myself in order to pay for their spectacular failures. The peace I had cultivated, the security I had worked so hard to achieve, to them, it was just a resource, an emergency fund they could tap into at will. I looked at their faces, my pleading mother, my terrified sister, my grimly serious brother-in-law, and my silent, stoic father. They weren't my family. They were a demolition crew, and they had just handed me the blueprints for my own destruction. My mother's words seemed to hang in the greasy air of the diner. It's just a thing, Clara. It's bricks and wood. If you sell your house, you could save your sister. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was a sudden, roaring vacuum. All sound, all thought had been sucked out, replaced by that one monstrous phrase, "It's just a thing." My house. The physical embodiment of a decade of my life, of nights spent staring at a computer screen until my eyes ached, of skipped meals, of faded friendships, of a loneliness so profound it had felt like a permanent part of my being. The sanctuary I had built for myself, piece by painful piece, was just a thing to her, an asset to be liquidated for the daughter who truly mattered. The silence stretched on. It was no longer a tense, awkward pause. It was my territory now. I owned that silence. I let it grow, watching as their expressions shifted from hopeful pleading to confusion and then to irritation. They had come prepared for a battle, for tears, for a negotiation. They were not prepared for the calm, dead stillness that met their demand. Finally, I took a slow sip of water. I set the glass down on the paper napkin with a soft, deliberate thud. I looked at each of them one by one. I looked at Leo, the failed visionary, already planning his next move. I looked at Olivia, her face blotchy from her performance, a petulant frown now replacing her look of terror. I looked at my mother, her eyes begging me to give in, to make it easy, to be the daughter she needed me to be. And last, I looked at my father. His face was a thundercloud of impatience, his jaw tight with anger that I was daring to make them wait. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Leo sputtered first. "No? What do you mean, no? Did you not hear what I said? These are dangerous people, Clara. This isn't a joke." "My answer," I repeated, my gaze fixed on my parents, "is no." "Clara, for God's sake," my mother cried, her voice rising with hysteria. "This is your sister's life we're talking about. How can you be so selfish? Selfish!" The word snapped me out of my calm. A cold fire began to burn in my chest. Was I selfish when I worked every night for 6 years? Was I selfish when I ate canned soup so I could save every last dollar? Was I selfish when I gave up my entire 20s for a dream? A dream you want me to set on fire to pay for his mistakes? I jabbed a finger toward Leo. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the salt shaker jump. "That's enough," he growled. "Family helps family. End of story." The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost comical. I felt a strange, wild smile touch my lips. "Family helps family," I repeated, my voice dripping with an irony I didn't know I possessed. "That's fascinating coming from you, because I seem to recall you standing in your living room 6 years ago and telling me very clearly that I was no longer a part of this family. Do you remember that?" "I do." I remember the exact look on your face. You were the one who ended it. You don't get to resurrect the definition of family only when you need something from me." His face turned a dark, mottled shade of red. For a moment, he was speechless. I had used their own history, their own words, as a shield, and they had no defense. Olivia, seeing that the situation was slipping from her control, started to sob again. But this time, it sounded different. It was the desperate, angry wail of a child who's been told she can't have a toy. "They're going to hurt us," she cried, loud enough for people in the next booth to turn and stare. "They said they'd come to the house. What are we going to do?" As she wailed, my eyes drifted to the table. Next to her half-eaten stack of pancakes lay a set of car keys. The logo on the fob was a blue and white propeller. BMW. It was new, sleek and black, a $60,000 piece of polished metal, sitting right there while she cried about being destitute and in mortal danger. I pointed to the keys. "What's that?" Leo instinctively tried to cover them with his hand, but it was too late. Olivia stopped crying and looked down, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "It's my car," she mumbled. "It's new," I stated. It wasn't a question. "We needed a reliable vehicle," Leo said smoothly, recovering his composure. "For the business." It was an essential expense. The lie was so audacious, so insulting, that I had to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and brittle. "You're telling me you're $200,000 in debt to violent criminals who are threatening your lives, but you went out and bought a brand new BMW?" The entire narrative disintegrated. The life or death drama evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner. They weren't in danger. They were just in debt. They had overextended themselves, as always, and were now facing the consequences. There were no loan sharks, no broken kneecaps. There was just a bad business deal and a luxury car they couldn't afford. I pushed myself out of the booth and stood up. I took a $20 bill from my wallet and laid it on the table to cover my coffee. It was a final symbolic gesture. I was paying my own way out. "Sell the car," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "Sell your designer clothes and your expensive gadgets. Sell your own house, but you are never, ever touching mine." I turned and walked away. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I could feel their stunned, hateful glares on my back. As I reached the door, my father's voice boomed across the diner. "You'll regret this, Clara. You hear me? You'll regret this." I pushed the glass door open and stepped out into the weak afternoon sun. I didn't look back. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the only thing I would ever regret was the 60 minutes I had just wasted believing, even for a second, that they might have changed. The week after the diner confrontation was one of the calmest I'd experienced in a long time. The finality of it was freeing. I had faced them. I had seen through their pathetic lies, and I had said no. There was no ambiguity left, no lingering hope for reconciliation that could be weaponized against me. The door was closed, and I was the one who had finally bolted it shut. I told Daniel everything, and the relief in his eyes mirrored my own. We spent the weekend working in my garden, our hands in the cool earth, the sun on our backs. For the first time, I felt like my sanctuary was truly impenetrable. I had drawn the line, and I was safe behind it. How naive I was. It happened the following Saturday. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning. The golden light I loved so much was streaming through my living room windows, and the air smelled of coffee and fallen leaves. I was sitting at my desk in my home office reviewing a project report when a loud, aggressive pounding rattled my front door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the quick tap of a delivery driver. It was a hard, insistent banging that vibrated through the floorboards. A knot of pure dread tightened in my stomach. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. It was them. My parents, Walter and Helen, were standing on my porch. They looked completely out of place against the cheerful yellow of my front door. My father's face was a grim, unreadable mask. My mother was fidgeting with her purse strap, her expression a strange cocktail of nervousness and righteous indignation. My first thought was, don't open it, just pretend you're not home. Wait until they go away. But I knew they wouldn't. The knocking came again, louder this time, a percussive, demanding summons. They knew I was here. They had come for a reason. Taking a deep breath, I turned the deadbolt and opened the door, but left the security chain latched. I opened it just a few inches, enough to see them and for them to see me. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "We need to talk to you, Clara," my mother said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We already talked," I replied. "I have nothing more to say." "Don't be ridiculous," my father grunted. "Let us in." "No," I said simply. "This is my home. You are not welcome here." The moment the word no left my lips, my father's face contorted with rage. In a movement so fast I barely had time to react, he slammed his shoulder against the door. The wooden frame groaned, and the small brass chain ripped from its moorings. The door flew inward, and they were inside. They had just forced their way into my home, into my sanctuary. I stumbled backward, a gasp of shock and fear escaping my lips. They stood in my entryway, breathing heavily, looking around my living room not as guests, but as conquerors. "How did you find me?" I whispered, my mind reeling. "It wasn't hard," my mother said, her eyes sweeping over my belongings with a critical, appraising gaze. She ran a finger along my bookshelf, checking for dust. "We hired a private investigator. Cost a fortune, money we don't have, thanks to you." The blame, as always, was laid squarely at my feet. They had spent money to violate my privacy, and somehow it was my fault. My father ignored me completely. He began to walk through my house, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I had so carefully polished. He peered into the kitchen. He glanced up the stairs. He was casing the joint, assessing its value, its size, its potential. "It's too much space for one person," my mother declared, her voice filled with a bitter, resentful envy. "All these rooms, and for what? So you can sit in here alone while your sister is about to be thrown out on the street?" "She is not about to be thrown out on the street," I shot back, finding my voice again. Anger was beginning to replace my fear. "She's driving a BMW, and you are trespassing. I want you to leave. Now." My father re-emerged from his tour of my ground floor. He came to a stop in the middle of my living room, right in the patch of golden morning light, and turned to face me. He looked like a storm cloud that had drifted inside my house. "We're not leaving," he said, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "Not until you see reason. We will sit here all day and all night if we have to. We are not leaving this house until you agree to sell it and give Olivia the money she needs." It was a siege, a home invasion. They were attempting to take me hostage in my own life, believing that if they applied enough pressure, I would eventually break. They were so blinded by their own narrative that they couldn't see the profound line they had just crossed. They weren't concerned parents, they were criminals. I stared at him, at the man who was my father, standing there threatening me in the middle of the peaceful life I had built to escape him. I saw the rage in his eyes, the absolute conviction that he was right, that he was entitled to this, to my home, to my future. And in that moment, all fear left me. It was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. Their eyes followed the movement. My mother's face registered confusion, but my father's eyes narrowed. He knew what was happening. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. "You have broken into my home. You have threatened me. You are trespassing. I am going to give you one chance to walk out that door. If you are not on the other side of it by the time I count to 3, I am calling 911. My mother gasped. "Clara, you wouldn't. We're your parents." "My parents wouldn't break down my door," I said, my thumb hovering over the keypad. 1. My father didn't move. He stood his ground, challenging me, testing me one last time to see if there was any trace of the obedient, frightened daughter left inside me. 2. I looked him straight in the eye, and he saw it. He saw that she was gone. The person he thought he could control no longer existed. He saw that I would do it. With a final, disgusted snarl, he turned. "Fine," he spat. "Have it your way." He stormed towards the door, yanking my mother by the arm as he went. He threw the door open and paused on the threshold to look back at me, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You are dead to us," he said. Then they were gone. The door was left wide open, a gaping wound in the side of my house. I stood there, shaking with adrenaline, my phone still clutched in my hand. I listened until the sound of their car engine faded down the street. Only then did I walk over and close the door, locking the deadbolt and leaning my forehead against the cool wood. My sanctuary suddenly feeling like a cage. I knew, with a terrifying clarity, that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war. After the sound of my parents' car faded, a new kind of silence filled my house. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I had cherished. It was a tense, violated silence, humming with the residue of their rage. My home, my beautiful sanctuary, suddenly felt like a crime scene. I walked through the rooms, touching the door frame where the chain had snapped, looking at the spot in my living room where my father had stood and threatened me. The golden morning light now seemed harsh and interrogating, illuminating all the places they had contaminated with their presence. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. They had not just invaded my house, they had invaded my sense of safety. When Daniel came home that evening, he found me sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by half-packed cardboard boxes. He took one look at my face, at the snapped chain dangling from the doorframe, and he didn't need an explanation. He just sat down on the floor in front of me, took my hands in his, and waited. I told him everything, the words spilling out in a shaky, breathless torrent. He listened, his expression hardening into a quiet anger I had never seen in him before. "They crossed a line, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "A big one. You can't stay here. You'll never feel safe." His words confirmed the terrifying thought that had been circling in my own mind all afternoon. He wasn't being dramatic. He was right. The house was no longer a fortress. It was a target. My address was a liability. As long as I was here, they would see my home as a prize to be won, a resource to be seized. Staying here wasn't an act of defiance. It was an act of waiting for the next attack. The decision was both agonizing and simple. This house was my entire life's work. Selling it felt like a surrender, like letting them win. It felt like tearing out a piece of my own soul. But the dream was never just about the house itself. The hardwood floors, the fireplace, the porch swing. The dream was about peace. It was about a place where I could finally exhale, where I could be safe from the emotional storms of my family. This house could no longer offer that. To save the dream, I had to abandon the building. That night, my hands still trembling slightly, I called my realtor. "Maria, it's Clara Evans," I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "I need to sell my house, and I need to do it fast." Maria, bless her, didn't ask too many questions. She heard the urgency in my voice and simply said, "Okay, I'll be there tomorrow morning." The next 2 weeks were a blur of organized chaos. Maria listed the house as a priority sale, and the market, thankfully, was on my side. There was a whirlwind of showings, open houses, and offers. Strangers paraded through my life, judging my paint colors and my closet space. I packed. Daniel helped me every evening, wrapping my dishes in newspaper and taping up boxes. Each object I packed away felt like a memory being stored. The worn armchair where I read on rainy afternoons, the coffee mug Daniel had given me, the small framed photo of a mountain lake that was the only decoration I'd had in my old studio. I was dismantling my life piece by piece. It was heartbreaking, but with every box I sealed, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I wasn't just packing up my belongings, I was shedding a skin, leaving behind the version of myself who could still be hurt by those people. We found a buyer in 10 days, a young couple expecting their first child. They fell in love with the golden morning light, just as I had. Seeing the hope and excitement in their eyes was a balm on my grief. I knew they would be happy here. I knew they would restore the peace that had been stolen from the house. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. I gave my notice at work, transitioning my team to a new leader. Daniel, whose architectural firm had a branch in Austin, easily arranged for a transfer. We found a modern apartment online in a secure building downtown, a place of anonymous steel and glass that felt like the polar opposite of my vulnerable Victorian cottage. The day we left Denver, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just looked forward, at the highway stretching south, towards a city where no one knew my name. For a month, life was blessedly normal. We settled into Austin, enjoying the anonymity of a big city. We explored new coffee shops, walked along the river, and slowly began to build a new life, a new home together. The tension that I had been carrying in my shoulders for years began to dissolve. I started sleeping through the night again. I started to believe finally that it was over. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Denver area code. My heart seized. For a moment, I was back in my old house, the sound of my father's fist on the door echoing in my ears. Daniel saw the look on my face. "You don't have to answer that," he said. But I knew I did. I had to know. I swiped to answer, my voice a tight whisper. "Hello? Am I speaking with Clara Evans?" A calm, professional voice asked. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Officer Reed with the Denver Police Department. Ma'am, I'm calling about an incident that occurred at your former residence." My mind went blank. I couldn't process his words. My former residence? An incident? "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I don't understand. I sold that house a month ago." "Yes, ma'am. We're aware of that," the officer said patiently. "That's why we're calling. Last night, we arrested 2 individuals, Walter and Helen Evans, for breaking and entering and felony destruction of property at that address." The world tilted on its axis. I sank down onto the sofa, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "They were under the impression that you still lived there," Officer Reed continued, his voice a dispassionate river of facts. "According to the new homeowners, who were thankfully out of town, your parents broke in through a back window. When they were apprehended, they were in the living room, with crowbars. The image exploded in my mind. My father and mother, their faces twisted with rage, swinging heavy metal bars in that beautiful, light-filled living room where I had dreamed of a peaceful life, smashing the windows, tearing holes in the walls, destroying a stranger's wedding photos, a child's toys, a family's peace. They hadn't just been trying to intimidate me. They had been trying to annihilate my life. They had come to destroy my home, and in their blind rage, they had destroyed their own lives instead. The days that followed the phone call from Officer Reed were surreal. I had to give a formal statement over the phone to a detective, a long and emotionally draining process that forced me to recount the entire sordid history of the last 6 years. I told him about the first ultimatum, the staged dinner party, the 6 years of silence. I told him about the meeting at the diner, the fabricated story of loan sharks, and the demand that I sell my house. And I told him about the invasion, about my father breaking the chain on my door and threatening me in my own living room. As I spoke, laying out the timeline of their escalating aggression, I felt a strange sense of validation. For the first time, their actions were not just a private family drama, but a public record of harassment and intimidation. I was no longer just their difficult daughter. I was the victim of a crime, and the world could finally see it. The detective also put me in touch with the young couple who had bought my house. I called them, my stomach twisting with guilt and shame. They were shaken but incredibly kind. They told me the damage was extensive. My parents had shattered every window on the ground floor, kicked holes in the drywall, overturned furniture, and smashed all their dishes. The total estimated cost of the repairs was over $50,000. They had taken a space filled with a new family's hope and dreams and filled it with violence and splinters. Apologizing for my parents' actions was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Because the crime was so brazen and the evidence so clear, they had been caught, crowbars in hand, by a neighbor who saw their flashlights and called the police. The legal process moved quickly. Faced with a mountain of evidence and multiple felony charges, Walter and Helen Evans pled guilty. I followed the case through a victim's advocate who would call me with updates. I learned they had hired a lawyer who tried to paint them as desperate parents, pushed to the brink by a cold and unfeeling daughter who had abandoned them. It was the same narrative they had always used, but it didn't work in a court of law. Facts were facts. They had broken into a private home and systematically destroyed it. Their sentencing was a quiet affair. Thanks to their clean records and their guilty plea, the judge showed them a degree of leniency. They avoided prison time. Instead, they were given 5 years of probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and a permanent restraining order that forbade them from ever contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my person or residence again. But the most significant part of the sentence was the financial restitution. They were ordered to pay for every penny of the $50,000 in damages they had caused. And that is where the poetic justice of it all truly began. My parents did not have $50,000. They had a modest retirement account and the house they had lived in for 35 years. The very house where they had sat in judgment of me, where they had plotted to take my home, was now the only asset they had to pay for their crimes. They were forced to sell it. A few months later, I saw the listing online. It was strange to see the rooms I grew up in presented in the glossy, impersonal language of a real estate website. Charming suburban home, perfect for a growing family. I felt a pang of something, not sadness, but a sense of cosmic irony. The universe was balancing the scales. They had tried to make me homeless to solve a problem of their own making, and now they were losing their own home for the same reason. The most twisted part of the story, however, came a few weeks after the sale of their house closed. I got a call from a distant aunt, my mother's sister, with whom I had only ever exchanged polite Christmas cards. She sounded awkward and embarrassed, but she said she felt I had a right to know. She told me that after the restitution was paid, my parents had about $90,000 left from the sale, and they had given every last cent of it to Olivia, even after everything, even after their lives were ruined by a chain of events started by her and Leo's greed. Their blind devotion never wavered. They had lost their home, their reputation, and their other daughter, and their response was to reward the person responsible. The knowledge was staggering. It was the final, irrefutable proof that their family was a cult with Olivia at its center, and I had been right to escape. My aunt also confirmed something the police had uncovered during their investigation. The dangerous loan sharks Leo had spoken of with such gravity did not exist. There were no mobsters. There were no threats of violence. The $200,000 debt was real, but it was owed to a legitimate investment firm that had backed one of Leo's failed ventures. The firm was threatening them with nothing more than a civil lawsuit. The entire life and death story had been a calculated lie, a piece of emotional blackmail designed to scare me into sacrificing everything. Hearing this final confirmation didn't make me angry. It just made me feel tired and then profoundly, deeply free. There was no room left for doubt, no space for guilt, no lingering question of what if. I had seen them for exactly who they were, and I had made the right choice. A year has passed since my parents' sentencing. It is a Saturday morning, much like the one when they broke down my door, but it feels like a lifetime ago. I am sitting in the kitchen of the home I share with Daniel in Austin. The air smells of coffee and the sourdough toast he is making. Sunlight, soft and hazy in the way of the Texas hill country, is filtering through the large window, illuminating the comfortable, happy life we have built together. It is a different kind of light than the golden glow of my old house, but it feels just as much like home. It feels like peace. Last month, on the anniversary of our move to Austin, Daniel asked me to marry him. We were on a boat on the lake, the city skyline receding behind us, and he didn't have a grand speech. He just said, "I want to build a safe life with you forever." I said yes, without a moment's hesitation. The engagement ring on my finger feels solid and real. It is a promise of a future built not on obligation or transaction, but on mutual respect and genuine love. My career has flourished here. I now manage my tech team remotely, a job that gives me the flexibility and independence I've always craved. I am good at what I do. I am respected. I have built a life that is entirely my own, on my own terms, funded by my own hard work. The ghost of the tired, lonely girl eating canned soup in her studio is finally gone. I sleep better than I ever have in my entire life. About 6 months ago, the first letter arrived. It was addressed to me, forwarded from my old Denver address, which the post office still had on file. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. I held it in my hand for a long time, the paper feeling heavy with the weight of unspoken words. A part of me, a deeply buried younger part, was curious. Did it contain an apology, an explanation, a plea for forgiveness? I sat with it for an hour. Then I showed it to Daniel. He read the envelope, then looked at me. "What do you think is in there that could possibly make you feel better?" he asked gently. And I knew he was right. There was nothing she could write that could heal the wounds she had inflicted. The letter would not be for me. It would be for her. It would be filled with excuses, with blame disguised as regret, with attempts to pull me back into the vortex of her drama. It would be another demand, another violation. I walked to the kitchen, slid the letter into our paper shredder, and watched as it was turned into meaningless confetti. Another one came a month later, and another after that. They all met the same fate. I was no longer accepting their mail. I was no longer accepting their narrative. Sometimes, new friends or colleagues who don't know my full story will ask about my family. Do they live nearby? Are you seeing them for the holidays? The questions are innocent, born of a world where family is assumed to be a source of comfort. When I tell a shortened, gentle version of the truth, we're not in contact. It's complicated. I sometimes get a look of pity. And then comes the inevitable question, often whispered, "But don't you feel guilty?" The answer is no. I feel sad that the people who were supposed to be my protectors were the source of my deepest pain. I feel grief for the family I wish I had, the one I saw on television and in the homes of my friends. But I do not for one second feel guilty for what happened to them. Guilt was the cage they built for me, and I refused to live in it anymore. Their downfall was not my fault. It was the direct and unavoidable consequence of their own choices, their own rage, and their own profound moral failings. I didn't push them off a cliff. I just refused to be pulled over the edge with them. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. The hardest boundary you will ever have to build is often the one that finally sets you free. My family, I now realize, didn't just break into a stranger's living room with crowbars. In a way, they did it to me years before, shattering my trust and sense of self-worth. Their final violent act was just the thing that allowed the rest of the world to see the wreckage. Family isn't defined by shared blood. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by the people who cherish your peace of mind as much as their own. My family is Daniel. It is the close friends who have become our Austin tribe. It is the quiet, stable, and beautiful life I have built. My name is Clara Evans, and I have no regrets. I am finally free.